It is a Friday. It is a football Friday. It's, of course, not a football Friday for the Denver Broncos, who already handled business yesterday up in the Meadowlands, taking care of the New York Jets. Advantage there for the Broncos. They finally get their first win of the season. Much needed. Very, very important win. They did not want to start 0-4 for 2 consecutive seasons. And that's not only the team, but specifically Vic Fangio, who would have looked pretty bad given that situation. So the Broncos do find a way to get it done, and that ends up being a good spot for them, even though we don't quite know what we learned in this particular circumstance, because it's not as if the Jets were all that good. Matter of fact, they're generally considered the consensus worst team in the league. So for the Broncos, what ended up being solved for this team? And in that case, it's pretty tough to break it down. And I think they found their backup. So there's that. I think they found their long-term backup in Brett Rippon, who ended up looking really good in spots. Last night, there were so many times that we had callers as we hosted the program here. We had the fan football postgame right here on this spot as well. The idea that Brett Rippon played amazingly well, that he was so good that you have to be overly impressed. Look, I was satisfied with what I saw, because the Broncos bar is set so low when it comes to quarterbacking at this point that anything short of an abject disaster is useful. And yes, they did end up getting the win, and Rippon played all right. But the truth of the matter is, he ended up throwing in a game where he could have given up literally a touchdown and 4 interceptions. So he made quite a few mistakes. That's to be expected. I'm not going to go overboard and criticize that and look at the Broncos situation and go, wow, that's proof positive that he wasn't very good. He was fine. And for the Broncos, that may be good enough, because they're not looking for a starter, fortunately. This isn't one of those situations where you look at it and think, well, they need to find out if they have a quarterback that is the guy. You're not really looking for that. They don't really need that. What they're looking for in this game was a backup that could get the job done for them, that might be able to be the backup. Jeff Driscoll had a $2.5 million deal for the Broncos for 1 year. That seems like a lot when you consider how few times they really wanted him to play. After only literally part of a game. He played part of one game and then the other part of another game, and that was it. That's all they did. And they moved on from him. So they need Rippon to be good. Absolutely, they need Rippon to be good, and they need to be able to save themselves some money. Now, if Drew Locke was out for a longer time, would Blake Bortles be part of the equation? Maybe, but it doesn't sound like it. Fangio is going to keep all 4 quarterbacks, Locke, Rippon, Driscoll, and Blake Bortles, on the 53. So that's unusual. A team that likes keeping 2 ends up with 4. And I understand why you would do that at this point. Noah Fant and KJ Hamler. Noah Fant hurt his knee. KJ Hamler hamstring, could miss a couple of weeks each. That's an enormous problem. AJ Boye could conceivably come off the injured list because he spent 3 weeks, but he probably won't. His dislocated shoulder needs a little more time. Without Fant, without Hamler, without Sutton, you are talking about Tim Patrick, and you are talking about Jerry Jeudy. Now, that worked well enough for the Broncos against the Jets. Is that going to be enough against the Patriots in a week and a half? Probably not. Now, depth is important all over the place for the Broncos, and they're losing it. They added Sylvester Williams. They added Darius Kilgo, both familiar names for Denver Broncos fans, drafted in very different rounds. Kilgo in the 6th and Williams their 1st overall pick Though they are both signed to the practice squad as the Broncos try to get a little bit more depth along the defensive line. Regarding the way the defense played, though, that's what I thought was really fascinating. More than just about anything, the idea that the defense became more aggressive in a way that they haven't before. I talked about this last night. Vic Fangio's defenses in general, don't particularly blitz often. That's just the truth. The Broncos blitz at a lower percentage than most teams. Vic Fangio's defenses over the course of his career bring fewer blitzes. But last night, the Broncos went ahead and went after Sam Darnold, the guy who admitted he was seeing ghosts last year, and had some success. They certainly looked to be dictating the pace. And in that regard, that's a nice change. You haven't seen that for a while with the Denver Broncos. This is a team that's kind of sit back and let the other team dictate the action and then go ahead and take a look at trying to stop the scoring, whether it ends up being in turn a 7 into a 3, try to find a way to limit it. But it's not a defense that goes and hunts quarterbacks. It's not a defense that finds itself going after the quarterbacks and forcing turnovers with a very high rate. The Broncos last year blitzed at a 24.1% clip. That is a far cry from the league's top. The Baltimore Ravens blitzed at 54.9. The Jets last year were at 39.2 themselves. So the Broncos under Fangio just haven't been the kind of team that does that. This season has looked the same until last night. The Broncos' blitz percentage, including last night, by the way, is 13.5%. And they had hurried quarterbacks on only 6.2% of their dropbacks. That's not a lot. That ends up being a rather low percentage. And the Broncos really switched it up. The only team that's lower at all are the Chargers and the Colts. And that's after last night's performance. So the Broncos had success. The counterpoint that I got a lot of texts on the RamosLaw.com text line about, and I get it, is the fact that they gave up 21. They gave up 21, but one of those was on a bizarre, highly unlikely quarterback run by Sam Darnold that startled the entire football world. And I'm taking away nothing from him because Darnold, in that 46-yard scamper, broke 3 Broncos tackles and cut back on everybody. I mean, it was amazing. It was one of the best runs I've seen all year from anybody. So I want to give Darnold credit there. Did the Broncos miss tackles? They did. Would you expect to give that up every game? No, I would not. So I look at it and think under normal circumstances, the Broncos gave up 14 points. That's enough to win you games. That should be enough to win you games. And the Broncos can continue to do that. They'll do okay. The problem is I don't think they'll be able to continue to do that because the teams left on their schedule, there aren't too many more like the Jets. Next week, New England under Cam Newton has been very, very effective. As usual with Bill Belichick, they always seem to find a new hero every week. Rex Burkhead getting it done last week. Sony Michel also looked good, and Cam Newton's been terrific. He looks rejuvenated. He looks like Cam Newton again. They're 2-1. They lost that shootout to the Seahawks. But they're a much more dangerous team than the Broncos. Now, the Broncos do play the Dolphins in 2 weeks. And that would be helpful because the Broncos themselves are probably better than the Dolphins, especially if they get healthy. Now, how long the injuries to Fant and Hamler last are going to be a big part of this equation. And if it's going to be a significant amount of time, it's a real problem because you look at the games that are quote-unquote winnable, and I know it's the NFL. They're all winnable. I get it. The winnable games where you look at a 1-3 Broncos team and say, what do they have a chance? Is it against New England? Not realistically. Now, Drew Locke, of course, might be back. That certainly changes things. But at this point, given the Broncos' other injuries, it doesn't make them better than the Patriots. And right before the bye, they played the Chiefs, and there's no football team on earth that's better than the Chiefs right now. Not even close. And the Broncos certainly don't qualify. The next game you want to really aim for is Miami. Now, I know Broncos fans going into the bye would like to be a lot better than 2-5, but that's probably where they'll be, assuming they play well against the Dolphins. The Dolphins, mind you, last year under Brian Flores, were stripped down to the screws, and they still played very, very hard. Now, they've lost to the Patriots. They lost in a shootout to the Bills only by 3, and they smoked the Jaguars last week, 31-13. They're not going to be moving towards Tua Tagovailoa anytime yet. The word late last week is he hasn't even yet been tackled since the hip surgery. I don't expect they'll rush it. But at the same time, do they need to? When you look at what Ryan Fitzpatrick has done, he's got a quarterback rating of 91.4 thus far. So he's been pretty good. He does this in streaks, and they might be able to continue doing it. But for the Broncos, as they continue to wind their way through this season, there aren't that many winnable games left. And what I was really surprised about is how many people texted and how many people called and indicated that maybe winning that game wasn't the best thing the Broncos could have done. That one struck me as surprising because this is not a team that was going to tank for Trevor Lawrence. This is a team that believed, like it does every year, and sometimes that's to its detriment, that they're going to be a playoff team, that they're going to find a way to get in that postseason, and maybe they'll get hot, and that's what the Broncos sell not only the fans, but themselves on year after year. They're not going to do it this year. They weren't going to do it this year after Von Miller got hurt. They had a slight chance when Miller was healthy if everything broke right. Well, everything is not broken right for the Broncos. A couple things are breaking right. Jerry Jeudy looks like the future star that everyone expects him to be. Bradley Chubb looks healthy again, which is great because after multiple injuries in his career, it's reasonable to think that maybe that could be a concern, that maybe he's never going to reach what we saw as a rookie again. But what you saw last night looked very much like the Bradley Chubb of old. Bradley Chubb was extraordinary. Clearly the Broncos' most impactful defensive player of the game, 5 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 5 quarterback hits. Yeah, so Chubb looked good. It's also worth noting a couple other things look good on that defense. Bryce Callahan looked good. Broncos didn't have him all last year. He looked good. He was staying with guys. He was effective. And then maybe the biggest surprise was Josie Jewell with his 2 sacks, one of them on a brilliant delayed blitz that the Broncos haven't done. So I liked seeing the way the defense played. I understand that there is a risk of giving up big plays. I get that. It's real. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to tell you that, no, don't worry about it. Of course you have to worry about it. If you're going to bring the blitz, you're going to find yourself taking some chances. But the truth of the matter is, this Broncos team is not stacked enough to go without taking chances. The Broncos allowed 1 offensive touchdown. That was Darnold's run. The other touchdown was on Desir's pick 6 in the 4th, and everything else they gave up was field goals. Sam Ficken had a pun not intended, field day with 5 field goals. He could have even had more. He missed 1. But I thought the defense did a terrific job forcing the action, and I have not seen Vic Fangio's defense do that. Even at its best in Chicago, it's good at limiting what another team can do. It keeps teams from scoring a ton of points. But they don't go put pressure on the quarterback. They don't grab a lot of turnovers. This is a defense that's reactive instead of proactive. Denver last night was proactive on defense, and it paid dividends. It's hard to think the Broncos would have won this game had they not played that style of defense. And it's a style of defense, I talked about this a bit last night, that's very important for the Broncos to play because this is how their roster is constructed. You didn't have Bradley Chubb to kind of be a reactive linebacker to go sit back there, occasionally cover a tight end and just lock down the outside path, lock down that outside edge. That's not what he's there for. He's there to go get the quarterback. That's what the Broncos defense is built on. It was refreshing to see them play like that again, to see the play calls on Fangio's defense, take that into consideration and build that forward for them. That's a great sign. I want to know what you think about it as well. The RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. Did you like what you saw last night? I was very surprised that so many texters last night did not like what they saw. They thought the Broncos were taking too many chances. I don't think that's the case. I would argue if it was one side or the other, they should take more chances. And I like the way they played. And I like the fact that Vic Fangio made the change. That's really what you're looking for, right? I think when you're looking at any head coach, and especially one that is older, you're concerned that they're a little bit set in their ways. Quite frankly, for one full season and 3 games, I think you could very easily say that about Vic Fangio. But now they've shown that they can do a little bit more, that he can adjust and that he can adapt. And I think that sitting back and camping and waiting to see what Cam Newton will do is a recipe for disaster for the Broncos. Get after him. And you know how that's the right idea? Because I watched the Broncos do that to Cam Newton in Super Bowl 50. And he wasn't the same player until this year. So the Broncos being aggressive and forcing the action. If you're going to lose trying to do something. Lose trying to stick with your identity. The roster you've built is built to go chase the quarterback. If you do that and you lose, I think you tip your cap and you move on. But you want to lose doing things the way you wanted to do them, not being reactive and not just having to adjust and adapt to what the other team does. The Broncos can still go get the quarterback. We saw that last night. Shelby Harris was good. Josie Jewell was good. Bradley Chubb was terrific. The Broncos can still get things done on that side of the ball. And they can force turnovers. They didn't last night, but they can. Because forcing quarterbacks into mistakes is the way you win a lot of football games. Quite frankly, the Jets almost won this game that way for the Broncos after forcing 3 Denver turnovers. I give Fangio credit for the way he called defense in that game. I really do. I wasn't sure he was ever going to adapt. It was his system, and he was plugging guys into that system that weren't necessarily fits for that system. Last night, you saw something different. And that's a good sign for the rest of this season, however it turns out. On the bright side, you may have enjoyed what you saw out of Brett Rippon. I thought it was okay. I'd like to have Drew Locke back. I imagine the Broncos would too. Here's the bright side. Maybe they will. We'll hear from Vic Fangio next. Oh, that feels like Friday. Big football weekend coming up. Baseball's wild cards. That round's over. The DS rounds start on Monday, and you have college football exploding back this weekend on Saturday. And then here we go with the pros on Sunday. And the Broncos get it off, which is great because they're really injured. They have a ton of injuries, obviously, and it's a major, major concern. On the bright side, the Denver Broncos, when Drew Locke was hurt against the Steelers, did not put him on the injured list. That was something of a surprise because this year, the injured reserve list is 3 weeks, and you're allowed to come back. There's no limit. Normally, it's just 2 players can come back. This year, that's it. It's just anybody. You can come back. So, a little surprising, but in this case, it might end up being the right thing because earlier today, while meeting with the media via teleconference, Vic Fangio hinted that there's maybe a better chance of seeing Drew Locke against the Patriots than we might have thought. The idea of him playing 50-50, I don't know how I feel about that because I look at Brett Rippon's performance and realize that's the best option they have as being a backup. And I mean no disrespect, but Brett Rippon threw for 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. It could have been 1 touchdown and 4 picks. And he's clearly the second best option, at least the one with any upside. And because Drew Locke is the only guy there on that roster in that position that you think could be the guy, the franchise quarterback, when you look at this schedule, when you look at this team, when you look at all the injuries, I mean, let's just spitball our way through the rest of the schedule, right? New England loss, and let's be generous to the Broncos. New England loss, Miami win, Kansas City loss, 2-5 at the break. Second half, Atlanta. Okay, well they can't hold a lead. So, okay, let's just say win. There's a win, okay? Atlanta, win. At Vegas, that's a loss. Chargers at home, let's say that's a win. New Orleans, loss. Kansas City, again, a loss. Carolina, a win. Buffalo's a loss. And probably at L.A. is a loss. And then you play the Vegas Raiders at home, and let's say that's a win. So that's a win against New York, a win against Miami, a win against Atlanta, a win against the Chargers at home, a win against Carolina, and a win against Vegas. That, I think, is generous. They'll probably lose a couple of those anyway. That's 6-10. They're not making the playoffs at 6-10, folks. So when I look at this situation, and I look at Drew Locke's future with the Denver Broncos and how important he is to it, I don't play Drew Locke till he's 100%. Not 50-50, 100. You have 4 active quarterbacks on your 53. If you need to play Brett Rippon, play him. If you need to find a way to get Blake Bortles in, get Blake Bortles in. I really don't care because this team is not going to make the playoffs. And if they're not going to make the playoffs, I don't want to see them risk their potential franchise quarterback. To me, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't know why you would do that. I don't know why you'd want to do that. I understand the Broncos want to win games. I understand that Vic Fangio in particular wants to win games. No coach in their first 2 years wants to go 7-9 and then be worse the next year. But that's what's in the cards for Vic Fangio. So I understand in Fangio's case, who's waited a very long time to get this shot, he wants to try to get wins any way he can get them. I can't blame him for that. That's his job. Very rarely do GMs come down from the front office and say, hey, you know what? We have a whole bunch of season left, but we're not going to go anywhere. We'd just like you to play our young guys, and if we lose, we lose. That's too much of a risk for new coaches. And Vic Fangio is a new head coach. Now, when you're in the last 2-3 weeks of the season and it's over, I get that. Sometimes that can happen. You just tell the coach, hey, We're not putting it on you. We just want to see the young guy. If we lose them all, not your fault. Okay. But when there are 12 games left, you can't ask Vic Fangio to do that. So he's going to go out there and try to win every game he can win. And if you're Drew Locke, you're chomping at the bit to try to go out there and prove that you're the guy, right? So this is where the Broncos have to be careful and sometimes go against their instincts. Fangio wants to win every single game. Drew Locke is going to want to play every single game he can possibly play. But that may not be the best thing for the Broncos long term. And long term is the way the Broncos should be thinking of it as of right now, because they're not going to the playoffs in the short term. They're not going to go to the playoffs this year. They're not going to have a winning season this year. They're going to have another losing season. And a full quarter of the way in, I feel comfortable saying that. It brings me no joy, but I certainly feel comfortable saying that that's what's going to happen. There's really no way you can disassemble this and say that the Broncos are going to find a way to have a winning season and make a run at the playoffs. They're on pace to have their fourth consecutive losing season and miss the playoffs for 5 following their Super Bowl win. That is not great. Let's put it that way. But this is the reality of the situation. And if you can't sit there and change it, then you have to be very careful regarding what you're doing. Yes, the Broncos are in the worst streak of football since they were an AFL club leading into the NFL. It's not what you want. But that's where they're at. And if you want to get out of it, sometimes you have to have a little longer thinking. You can't just keep saying, well, I'm going to win this one football game. Well, this one football game doesn't turn it around for you. Now, why the team is having its losing seasons is part of the equation, and there are many reasons. For a long window of time, the drafting was subpar. It has gotten better in the last few years. The coaching situation following Gary Kubiak's departure has been a mess. There's no other way to put that. You had Vance Joseph for 1 year, and you really probably didn't want to bring him back for the second year, but you didn't have any other options. You were deciding between Vic Fangio and some other options, and you picked Fangio. So far, that hasn't really worked out. Maybe it will. You certainly feel more comfortable about his readiness than Vance Joseph, but that's a low bar. So the Broncos' coaching situation is still a question. Their quarterback situation is still a question. Their offensive line, especially at the tackle position, is still a question. You can look at it any way you like, but this team is just not quite ready to compete. And it's not ready to compete, not because it's one thing of bad luck. It's because they haven't assembled a roster that's good enough to compete with regularity yet. And you can't do that during the season. You can do the best you can in the offseason, sign what free agents you can, draft the players you can draft. Hope that you've developed enough of your young guys that they'll make a leap from 1 year to the next. But once the season starts, you're out of luck. There's no way to significantly improve your roster mid-season. And I think that's the challenge for the Broncos. And one of the things that I think it becomes frustrating for the Broncos and their fans is this is, and I say this knowing full well, I can barely make toast, okay? I am useless in the kitchen. I can't cook anything. But I do know that the way you cook something is you get the best ingredients you can get. You mix it up, you put it in the oven, and after that, you just hope it turns out right. And there's not much you can do about it. Dylan's looking at me and explaining there's a lot more to cooking. Well, obviously, if I knew that, I wouldn't be bad, Dylan. I'm bad at it. But the Broncos haven't had the best ingredients. They've been getting better. But the off-season, at that point, you've put it in the oven. Now the Broncos find out what they have, and it's not good enough yet. Not surprised it's not good enough yet, but it's not good enough yet. It's trending in the right direction, and I actually will feel better, more than likely, about the Broncos after this season than I did after last season. Even though the record will probably be better after 2019 than it will in 2020. It's not always reflected in record. I know the old Bill Parcells, you are what your record says you are, and of course, in standings, that's true. But your trend line can be very different. And for the Broncos, with Drew Locke being a major influence on that trend line, I'm not playing him until he's 100%. And if that means waiting all the way to the bye, then that's what it means. If I'm the Broncos, if I'm Vic Fangio, I can't be afraid of that. Because even though Fangio feels like his career is probably on the line, and maybe it is, but his career's on the line with Drew Locke too. If he goes into a third season, he's going to need Drew Locke. If I'm the Broncos, rushing Drew Locke in this season, in this situation, would be short-sighted and potentially very damaging to the organization. I wouldn't do it. When I hear any number from the training staff that is less than 100, no thanks. He can sit. What's your thought? RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. The Broncos' offensive line, one of the areas of concern, they were really good yesterday, at least from a statistical standpoint. What changed? And what can they do to make sure things keep going that way going forward? We'll take a look at that next. Dylan Condon in the booth doing the topical music. Nicely done. Pressure was something that really wasn't too bad on Brett Rippon last night. Rippon was not sacked. Not at all. No sacks. No sacks surrendered by the Denver Broncos. In the previous 3 games, they had surrendered 13 sacks. 13! So quite a bit better. And I'll be totally honest, I thought DeMar Dotson looked pretty good. I told you before the game I didn't expect a significant drop-off, if any, and I don't think we saw one. I think we saw a offensive line that looked exactly the way that you expected it to look. It was going to be no significant drop-off from Wilkinson and maybe a little bit better. Well, I think it was a little bit better. I think it's just that simple. It was a little bit better. Last night, Garrett Bowles was the only offensive lineman for the Broncos not even to allow a quarterback pressure, according to Pro Football Focus. That's impressive because you're talking about a guy that, let's be honest, over the course of his career has done that a lot. Now, it depends, of course, on who ends up finding his way around the tackle position. If you're running into a speed guy, Garrett Bowles isn't as good. But Bowles, over the course of the last couple of years, let me give you his Pro Football Focus grades. And like I always say with Pro Football Focus, it's take it with a grain of salt. But there is some value in it. 2017, he was 72.9. 2018, 72.8. 2019, 76.1. Thus far this year, 86.6. With a pass block grade of 89.4. That means among all tackles this year, among all of them, and I don't believe this for a second, but it's worth noting because it does show some improvement. Garrett Bowles is listed as the 4th best tackle in football. I don't buy that. Yeah, I don't buy that, and I don't think you should buy that. But he's been significantly improved. If you count pass blocking, he's number 2 behind only Ronnie Stanley, and I don't believe that either. But it's hard to argue that he hasn't gotten better. I think he has gotten better. So whatever Mike Munchak is doing with him, the Broncos offensive line coach, seems to be working. And it couldn't be at a better time for Garrett Bowles. Bowles had his 5th-year option declined by the Broncos, and he is set to be a free agent. And now if the Broncos want to get a deal done with him, they're going to have to spend a good amount of money to do it. Bowles is 28 years old, so he's one of the older players on the entire Broncos offense. I know that sounds a little strange to say, but it's true. And if he continues to play well enough, because linemen on the free agent market make a ton of money, just ask Juwan James how that works. There is an opportunity for Bowles to really cash in and make it very difficult for the Broncos. The Broncos do not want to pay Bowles a huge contract because they punted on that 5th-year option. But they're not dissatisfied that he is playing well. To be fair, this is more complicated because all these guys aren't on an island. When you look at offensive line play, and we have 3 of those guys here at this station, Mark Schlereth and then Orlando Franklin and then Tyler Polumbus, and they'll tell you the same thing. An offensive line doesn't work because you have 5 talented guys who are all separately doing their own thing. An offensive line works because you have continuity, experience together, and the knowledge of what the other guy's going to do. Garrett Bowles last year was given one of the best young guards in the league in Dalton Risner. And that's helped a lot. Having Risner there makes a difference. We had talked about how Lloyd Cushenberry has had some really bad games. The last 2 weeks were pretty rough on him. And I get it. He's a rookie. That's going to happen. But he was pretty good yesterday, wasn't he? Some of this has to do with Risner, who's backing up Bowles and backing up Cushenberry because that's his job. Same with Graham Glasgow. He's helping Cushenberry, and he's helping DeMar Dotson. In Dotson's case, there's not a lot of help he needs from an experience standpoint. You're fully aware of what he can do after starting for so many years in the league. But Bowles is getting better. It's worth noting that, according to an article in The Athletic, the referees in the NFL prior to this season were told, quite frankly, to just stop calling as many holds. Well, there's no beneficiary in the league that's gained more than Garrett Bowles. And that's simply mathematics. Holding calls are down 59%. It's not a small amount. They're down 59% through the first 3 weeks of the season. Garrett Bowles, since he's come into the league in 2017, has led the entire NFL in holding. So nobody this year has had more holds taken away from him than Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles only has 2 penalties thus far. Through 4 games, I think you'll take that. But the holding calls have been brought down 59% all the way across the league, 60% basically. That's worth noting too. You can't necessarily ignore that. But he's playing better. And the Broncos line gets better with mobile quarterbacks for sure, or guys that have quick triggers. Jeff Driscoll was mobile. He did not have a quick trigger. So that's the problem. Now, Brett Rippon is not supremely mobile, but he does have a quick trigger. So, no problem. Of course, the quarterback that they've been the best for is Drew Locke. The Broncos have averaged only 1 sack a game since he's in every game he started. And the reason is because Drew Locke is highly mobile and has a quick trigger. It all works in concert. It's not necessarily just any particular lineman. There are ways it can break down, and you can certainly look at one particular person where it broke down, and it's unfortunate that he got hurt, but more than anybody of the starting 5, truth of the matter is it's been Elijah Wilkinson who's had the toughest road. Wilkinson was replaced by 34-year-old DeMar Dotson, and I thought the line looked rather stable. It was curious last night, though, that this line, which is generally pretty good at blocking, didn't look good at blocking for the run. They're usually a good run blocking team. They were not a good run blocking team last night. They were really having a tough time getting traction against that front 7 of the Jets. And I was a little surprised by that. Even including the 43-yard run by Melvin Gordon at the end of the game with a terrific block, highlight block by Brett Rippon to spring him, the Broncos still only ran for 117 yards, and that's the 3.7 per. Had that 43-yarder not been part of it, you're talking about 31 carries for 70 yards and change. That's bad. So that has to get better. Because if the Broncos are going to continue to go forward and try to win games, it is not going to be on Drew Locke chucking the ball 50 times a game. That's a good way to lose. It's a good way to lose with virtually any quarterback except for Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and what used to be Tom Brady and Drew Brees. Although it's a good way to lose. The Broncos are going to want to run. Phillip Lindsay should be back next week. He was only ruled out of the game on game day. So given another week and a half, he should be ready to go. If the Broncos offense is going to get going, especially with Fant and Hamler now being out for multiple weeks, you're talking about Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy and Deshaun Hamilton, and at least according to the targets, Nick Vannett is your receiving options. The Broncos are going to have to get it done on the ground. Last night, they didn't do it, but they did keep their quarterback more or less clean, except for the times that Adam Gase was having the Jets cheap shot him, or a very bad foul on Quinnen Williams, which they called a roughing, which was in no way, shape, or form a rough. But it got erased off the Broncos' record nonetheless. They're going to need to be better on the ground. And that's a big part of their chances going forward. How can they do that? And where will they go? We'll talk a little about that and discuss things with our friend Justin Adams of CBS 4 Denver next. The Denver Broncos got a little bit of an answer last night in their game against the Jets. The first win of the season for the Broncos, a 9-point victory out in the Meadowlands. But the interesting part of the equation, of course, and the main topic of conversation besides Bradley Chubb's rejuvenation, was the play of Brett Rypien. Rypien, the number 3 quarterback coming into the season behind Jeff Driscoll at number 2, with $2.5 million deal in 1 year. And clearly not the answer for the Broncos, because if it had been, after basically a game and change, they weren't going to move away from him. They wanted to try out Rypien and see what they had. Now, in the process, they also signed Blake Bortles. It is worth noting that all 4 of those guys will be on the 53 for the time being. Don't know what the plan is necessarily with Bortles, but this is what they're doing. And that's because Drew Locke is considered by Vic Fangio to be 50-50 when it comes to playing, but 50-50 means there's as good a chance of him playing as there is a chance that he won't. And if he won't, well, with 3 of the guys on the roster, well, you have to make some decisions. Earlier today, Vic Fangio was asked specifically about what he saw from Brett Rypien. I'd agree with that assessment. I mean, I think he seems to be a bright guy who learns pretty quickly, and I think that's a good sign. Obviously, you saw a rather immediate control of the offense. He didn't look overwhelmed at any particular point, and that's pretty exciting if you're a Broncos fan. He really didn't. At no point did really you watch him and think, wow, he's over his head. He's looking around, trying to find out what to do. He's not really confident in the play call. There was none of that. He seemed to be confident in the play call. He seemed to be able to spot the defense. But what you didn't see from a young quarterback, and it's not surprising, didn't go through his progressions very quickly. The pick 6 was, on replay, you take a look at it, he was looking in that direction the whole way, didn't look anybody off. They were able to follow his eyes, and that was easy. But young guys do that. Guys in their first start do that. They make bad decisions. That's to be expected. You don't love it, but that's the way it goes. The exciting thing is he didn't look flustered and over his head before or after that, even though he made those mistakes. You need to have the short memory. You threw a pick, well, unless you got pulled from the game, you just have to get rid of it and go out there and do things on the next drive. And I think he did that. It was a good game, as Vic Fangio said, in that light. You do have to take a look at him given the situation. And he's got a team with a ton of injuries, on a short week, with travel. Given all of that, look, he finished with a quarterback rating of 67.6. Sam Darnold was 70.5. Given that Rypien threw 3 interceptions, Darnold didn't. Darnold got sacked 6 times. Yeah, I would say it was all right. It wasn't amazing. But again, the Broncos aren't looking for a starter. Fangio was also asked specifically what the plan would be at backup quarterback if, and presumably at this point, when Drew Locke can't go against the Patriots. And I suppose that makes sense. And I think bringing up the coronavirus mention probably does make a lot of sense, too, because most teams under normal circumstances have 2 guys active. They're not Most teams aren't carrying three anymore. They used to, but not anymore. There's usually two. In this case, what the Broncos are saying is because of the coronavirus pandemic, they're really carrying three. It's going to be four because they don't want to put Drew Locke on the injured list. So if you kind of imagine that, they're really carrying three guys that could play on any given week. Ideally, given the Broncos' shorthanded nature in so many different positions, you'd rather not have four quarterbacks taking up space on the 53. But in this case, for the next couple weeks until things sort of stabilize, I get it. Because he is right. You can't just have one quarterback. Even two at this point is a little bit risky. As entertaining as it would be to see emergency quarterback Royce Freeman out there here and there, I don't think it's a recipe for success, and I'm pretty sure the Broncos don't want to do it. So it's a little strange, but it makes sense. And I expect to see Brett Rippon start for Week 5 against the Patriots. That is how I feel about the Buffs too. The same thing that they may go out and get nothing, no wins whatsoever, but they've got to go do something with Carl Durrell and let him get used to the coaching, and hopefully they can at least make some progress in what's been a long kind of arduous spinning in the tires of mud type of that situation for those Buffaloes. The current situation for the Denver Broncos among receivers is pretty fluid. Right now, in yards, Jerry Jeudy has taken the lead for the team, 234 yards and 1 touchdown. Noah Fant is number two, 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cortland Sutton is out for the year. Noah Fant, we now know, is out for a couple of weeks. KJ Hamler is out for a couple of weeks. The Broncos' number 2 receiver in yardage and number 2 receiver in receptions is Tim Patrick. He had something of a coming out party last night. Was it for real? Is it sustainable? The Broncos better hope so, because they don't have a lot of other options. We'll discuss that next. Tim Patrick last night in the Broncos 37-28 win over the New York Jets was terrific. 7 targets, 6 of them caught for 113 yards and a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy was next on that list with 61 yards on 2 catches. So Patrick almost doubled up the nearest closest teammate. Noah Fant had 5 catches for 35 yards, but left the game with injury. And according to Vic Fangio, he may miss a couple of weeks. Well, that's a bad sign for the Broncos because through the first 3 weeks, Noah Fant was the best receiver they had. And quite frankly, it wasn't all that close because of the injury to Courtland Sutton. So now, realistically, you were looking at losing Courtland Sutton, who's the best receiver. Noah Fant was, I think it's fair to say, this team's second best receiver at the time. And now you have Jerry Jeudy popping up. He leads the team's list on the season. And I'm not afraid to basically say that Jerry Jeudy is now the best receiver on the team. But what about Tim Patrick? And no, I'm not down with the Timmy Pats nickname. I'm trying a little too hard. Tim Patrick works. He's 26 years old, and he's been with the Broncos for a little while. He's basically worked his way up for the last 3 seasons and played a lot of special teams and had been kind of a situational guy. But it's interesting to note his career high in receptions was in 2018. He had 23. Last year, he had 16 receptions. He has 16 receptions now. He had 1 touchdown in his career coming into this season. He has 2 this season. So is this a situation where Tim Patrick has just kind of been right guy at the right spot? Or is there maybe a little bit more here? And I tend to think it's the latter, because you're talking about a guy that moves pretty well for 6'4", 212. Big-bodied receiver. And he's been around the league. He's been on this team. He knows what they need. He's physical. And I think there's value here. Now, that's good, because you're not getting Courtland Sutton back. Who knows when you're going to get KJ Hamler back? Who knows when you're going to get Noah Fant back? Targets last night, 7 of them went to Patrick. 6 went to Fant. He's not available. 4 went to Jeudy. 3 went to Melvin Gordon. And then after that, 3 to Deshaun Hamilton. And the less said about the frustrating miss late in the game, the better. Although I think everyone's been putting that on Deshaun Hamilton, and I get it, but it was an overthrow by Rippon that was over the wrong shoulder. And I understand the frustration, but I'm not sure that Hamilton deserves quite the amount of flack that people are giving him for that late pass. But then you have 2 for Vannett and Freeman and 1 for Jake Butt. So for the Broncos, the receiving options have dwindled pretty dramatically. And yeah, Tim Patrick's got to be, if not the guy going forward, he's got to be one of them. He's really got to be number 2 until they get Noah Fant back. Jeudy is the most talented of the bunch. Patrick seems to have the trust of the Broncos. And that's okay. Jeudy will get there in short order. Wouldn't surprise me if the very next game, we're talking about Jerry Jeudy with 7 targets and 120 yards and a touchdown, and Tim Patrick with 2 catches for 60. That wouldn't shock me at all. To me, Jeudy is the best receiver the Broncos have available, and it's not all that close. Even despite the sort of rookie expectations where there's going to be a hitch here and there. But Patrick's a big part of this equation. Without Noah Fant and without KJ Hamler, there is no question that Tim Patrick is the number 2 guy. And that means he's going to have to step up and have to produce. And that's a good situation for him. He's been trying to establish himself in this role. Even just the one game you had. Look, when you go for 6, 113, and 1 on Thursday Night Football, no matter who you play for and no matter who you play against, people's ears kind of perk up a little bit. The fantasy football players in particular, who get super excited about that. But people around the league notice. And when you notice that that guy is not some sort of burner, but he's a big physical guy that can go up and get you catches in those 50-50 type situations, yeah, it's a big part of this. And I think that's a terrific fit for Patrick. It's an opportunity. And that's the way so many young players on this team are going to have to look at it. Brett Rippon last night, an opportunity. Not an opportunity to be a starter, but an opportunity to prove that he can be a number 2, which, by the way, if you check the salaries, that's still a pretty good gig, all told. You can do pretty well as a backup quarterback. You could do worse. I know everyone wants to start, But if anybody wanted to give me a backup gig for the $2.5 million Jeff Driscoll got, I promise I won't complain if I never play it down. I promise. I'll be there for every practice. I will carry a clipboard and I will have a smile on my face doing it. So for Brett Rippon, that's not the worst situation. It's an opportunity. And for Tim Patrick, this is an opportunity. He's still young enough to be a very interesting receiver. And if the challenges for KJ Hamler to stay healthy are lingering, not only for the rest of this year, but maybe into next year, Tim Patrick has a chance to carve out a pretty good spot. Because even if Hamler comes up and becomes the number 3 receiver, as the Broncos want him to be, he's not 6'4". So for certain alignments, for certain matchups, for certain situations, Tim Patrick's going to be a better fit than KJ Hamler, period. So for Patrick, this is an immense opportunity. And the bright side is he looks up for it. And he looks like he's ready to actually take that step. He was really good last night. And he was consistent. The routes were good. His hands were good. Basically did everything you wanted. If it wasn't a number 81 Patrick running around there on the jersey, you'd think it borderline was a little bit of Cortland Sutton last night. Now, I'm not making the connection. Tim Patrick is not Cortland Sutton, and Tim Patrick won't be Cortland Sutton. But what we're talking about is the same thing for Brett Rippon. This is Tim Patrick's opportunity to be a top 3 wide receiver on some team in this league. Maybe it's the Broncos. Maybe down the road it's someone else. But the rest of this season, even if Hamler comes back and when Hamler comes back, Tim Patrick is that guy. He is a top 3 receiver. He's that way right now. And the fact that he looks ready for it, that's exciting. And good for Tim Patrick. He's worked hard to get this opportunity. And hopefully he has the opportunity to cash it in. So far, so good. Before we get to our weekend watch list, I wanted to talk a little bit about the passing of Bob Gibson, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of baseball. Gibson today died at the age of 84. The Hall of Famer, former MVP, 2-time Cy Young Award winner, 9-time All-Star, really legitimately changed the game. In 1968, what became the year of the pitcher, there were a lot of good pitching performances, but there wasn't anyone like Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson that year went 22-9 with 13 shutouts, 268 strikeouts to lead the league to only 62 walks, and at an ERA of 1.12. That is the best in the history of baseball, and he did it in a 304-inning season. After that season, where he won the Cy Young Award and the MVP, the league ended up lowering the mound to make sure that that downwards firing motion evened things out for the batters a little bit. And it's been that way ever since. It's never gone up to the level in which Gibson had it in 1968. Now, to think that that was a flash in the pan, not so. Gibson was All-Stars in 69, 70, and 72. He led the league in wins in 1970. He led the league in complete games in 1969. And he was an easy fit for the Hall of Fame. In a bit of a coincidence, it's also worth noting that on this date, October 2nd, 1968, in that year, Bob Gibson pitched in Game 1 of the World Series against the Detroit Tigers, taking them out for the Cardinals. He threw a complete game shutout with only 5 hits, 1 walk, and 17 strikeouts. That's still the Major League postseason record. So Bob Gibson passes away at 84, a great opportunity to remember one of the best pitchers in history, including one that quite literally changed the game. Our weekend watch list is next. Oh, it's Friday, and that means it is time for the weekend watch list because sports are back, and that means, we can watch them. Lots and lots of sports. And that's what Dylan and I do on the weekends. And, the rest of you are maybe getting stuff done, and good for you. I mean, I tip my cap. Maybe you're cleaning out the garage. Maybe you're changing spark plugs. Maybe you're mowing. Maybe you're winterproofing your sprinklers. These are all things I probably need to do, but won't because I'll be watching sports. So, good for you for doing it. And one day I'm sure it'll bite me in the backside. But in the meantime, I'm just going to be watching sports this weekend. And I will be starting with the local game and one that I love every single year. I love the Service Academy games. The Commander-in-Chief's Trophy is usually in Colorado Springs, and they will have a chance to go ahead and start that run when Navy takes on Air Force tomorrow afternoon. Coverage will be right here on the Fan at 3:30. What I don't like, Navy's favored by 7. That's weird. It's 2020. That doesn't mean anything.
It's true, but Navy was pretty good last year.
They were. I still think the Zoomies will get it. They'll get it. I feel confident. So that's where I'm starting. I can't wait to catch that game. That'll feel like college football to me. What's next for you?
Well, what's next for me is actually what is going to be coming up immediately after the Air Force game here on the Fan. It's a top 10 matchup. Number 4, Georgia taking on number 7, Auburn.
Ooh, that also feels like college football.
That definitely feels like college football.
Wow, that's a big one.
2 top 10 teams in the SEC going up against each other. There's nothing that feels more like college football than
No, Auburn only lost 4 games last year, and they were all to ranked teams, and their quarterback, Bo Nix, looks pretty good as well. And Georgia last year, of course, as we know, only lost 2 games last year. One was the eventual champion LSU, and the other one was in a bizarre 2 overtime loss to South Carolina. So these are 2 teams that have been really good. I expected to be really good. It's number 7 versus number 4?
Yep.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Between the Hedges out there in Athens, Georgia. Always love that, and you can catch it right here. So you used to say in the old, the sportscaster DJ voice, like, tune it in, and rip out the knob, because you won't need to go anywhere else. We can just run the games right here. We got you. The best games in college football tomorrow, right here on the Fan. Just flip it on in the afternoon and leave it. You don't even need to go anywhere else. On Sunday, of course, even though it feels like a foregone conclusion after the first 2, I am curious about the Lakers and Heat, the NBA Finals, Game 3, if only in part because the Nuggets looked like they were better than the Heat. The Nuggets maybe have been the team that gave the Lakers the best fight all playoffs long, and that should feel great for Nuggets fans. But the Heat can look like they may sweep this series. We'll find out if Miami can punch back. Coverage will also be on our sister station at 5 on Sunday night.
Do you think the Heat can get one?
No. Nope. Sweep. They're not getting anything. This thing's done. It's over. It's toast. Done. I don't know what to tell you, Dylan. It's finished. They don't stand a chance. The Heat are getting crushed. They can't do anything. Finito. What do you have? What's something that's not done?
Well, what's not done is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are going to be taking on the Chargers and actually hosting the Chargers in one of the morning games tomorrow. And coverage is actually going to be right here on the Fan. Yeah. That Sunday matchup with Chargers and Buccaneers in the AM, the Buccaneers 2-1, of course. I'm intrigued to see where that goes because obviously for the Chargers, it's going to be Justin Herbert sooner rather than later. And he played last week because, of course, poor Tyrod Taylor got his lung punctured from his doctor's pain-killing. I don't want to think about it anymore. He's already been ruled out this week as well.
Yeah. And the problem is he's not coming back because Justin Herbert went 35 for 49 with 330 yards, a touchdown, and 1 interception. And I know they lost, but he looked big time. There's probably no going back.
He wasn't the reason they lost.
No, I don't think there's any going back from that one. I am intrigued about the matchup later in the day, the one that will immediately follow that. And we will have that one right here on the Fan as well because we bring you all the big ones. This would be the Patriots and Cam Newton going to Arrowhead to face the Chiefs. Now, I don't think anybody's going to beat the Chiefs. Do not get me wrong. I don't. I really don't know who's going to beat the Chiefs if they're healthy. It's insane to say they could have an undefeated season, but they could really have an undefeated season. I am intrigued to see what the Patriots will do, though. They're still sort of a work in progress with Cam Newton. So far, it seems pretty promising. But now I want to see what they look like against the best teams before I really believe in the Patriots with Cam Newton as being a contender again. And if that's the case, it's impressive. Very rarely do you have a situation where you have a Hall of Fame level quarterback and they leave and you still have an opportunity to look immediately like contenders the next year. That would be extraordinary. We'll find out. I don't think they'll win, but the way they play, I think will go a long way towards finding out what kind of teams the Patriots will be this year. And of course, they're also the Denver Broncos' next opponent.
Right. And the Chiefs have already beaten Baltimore. If there's any team that's going to beat the Chiefs this year, I'd put my money on Bill Belichick and the Patriots.
That's about as good a chance. Yeah, because they smoked the Ravens already. So yeah, you're probably right, actually. I mean, who's better scheming defensively than Belichick? There's probably nobody there. So yeah, if anyone can do it, it's probably the Pats. So it'll be intriguing. I'm excited to see that one too. And we'll have it right here on the Fan, as we mentioned. What's next for you, Mr. Philadelphia guy? Philadelphia homer guy, following all those Philly teams.
Well, surprisingly, Patriots and Chiefs is not the Sunday night game. The Sunday night game is actually going to be the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the 49ers. The Niners have George Kittle back. He's going to be back this week against the Eagles. Eagles are...
they need a win.
They definitely need to win.
They are
they avoided
0-2-1.
They avoided a loss last week.
That's true.
They avoided a loss, but they still.
So did the Bengals. The Bengals were equally excited about that. But yeah, the Eagles are. There is an interesting story because Nick Mullins is as good a backup as there is. I mean, he's really good, and I don't think the Niners have missed too much. Obviously, they played a Giants team that wasn't very good, so I do get that, and I think you don't want to overvalue it and say that okay, well. They played a Giants team, so they're not good, and it doesn't matter, but they're still beat up. And they are still beat up. As far as the running backs for the Niners go, I have no idea who's there.
Aren't they on their like seventh string?
Yeah, I mean Mostert and Coleman, and they're all beat up. But the Eagles need this one bad. They're trying to figure out. There's a lot of talk about maybe even benching Carson Wentz, something that the Eagles have no interest in doing, and they've made that pretty clear. They're not going to move away from Wentz barring injury. But the longer this goes, with Jalen Hurts kind of the new sports car in the garage, it gets harder and harder not to go to him. But the problem is, if you're the Eagles, once you crack open that bottle, it's hard to put the genie back in. Wentz is only 27. I mean, if you're going to bench him healthy for Hurts, don't you have to trade Carson Wentz in the offseason? And that's not really what they had in mind.
I think it depends on how Hurts does. If he does come in for Carson Wentz, if he looks roughly the same, then might as well go with the quarterback that you've already paid.
Yeah, that's probably fair, although he's had a horrific start. Under 60% completions, 3 touchdowns, 6 picks, 11 sacks, a quarterback rating of 63.9. The Eagles need that one bad. Of course, we'll be looking to. We cheat a little bit on our weekend because when we come on, of course, it's right after Monday Night Football. And yeah, I'm counting Monday Night Football. The Falcons and the Packers. I'll tell you what about this, though. The Falcons are maybe the best 0-3 team I've ever seen. Because if they could just play 3-quarter football, they'd be undefeated. If they could just shorten the games a little bit, they would be fantastic. But they haven't been able to do that. They need to get better. You have the Falcons and the Packers. Falcons are 0-3. Packers are 3-0. Aaron Rodgers is out there dealing again. And we'll have that right here at the Fan, of course. And we will follow that immediately after the game. And we'll get back to our coverage of NFL football for you following that Monday night game. So all sorts of football for you this weekend. It's going to be a ton of fun to see college really hit in full swing, including the first Colorado team in action this fall in Air Force versus Navy. We'll have that right here, 3 p.m. at The Fan. It's been fun talking to everyone today. It's been a great week. The Broncos get a win. Thanks to Justin Adams for joining us. Follow him at Justin Adams TV at CBS for Denver. Dylan Condon in the booth makes everything work. D Condon Radio, that's DCONDON Radio. And my name's Sean Drotar, SDROTAR, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter. Have a great weekend. Be safe. This is The Fan Late Night on Denver Sports Station, Sports Radio 104.3, The Fan.